In this lesson, we're going to talk about countertransference and transference. So these are some, I guess you could call them basic concepts for therapists to understand.
Yeah.
The term transference, the terms transference and countertransference, coined back in the late 1800s, 1895, by the beloved, not beloved by everybody,
Sigmund.
Sigmund Freud, who I'm trying to
Do you love him?
emulate with my my bald head and my beard.
Good job.
Yeah. So countertransference, transference. When he coined the term, he's referring to so first, transference. These are feelings that the patient has about someone else that they are then projecting or transferring onto you as in his case, the analyst, right, as the therapist.
Yeah, projections is a good categorical term for it. Unconscious projections of energy between client and therapist.
It's usually the energy that gets projected is often this sort of an internalized relationship, right? So maybe they might project onto you the relationship that they have with a parent.
Yeah. Unconscious redirection of fears and desires is maybe another way to look at it too.
And, I'm not a Freud expert or a psychoanalyst for that matter, but as I understand it, transference was a normal and desirable part of the therapy process. You might even want to evoke transference so that then you could provide a corrective emotional experience for the client as you do not behave in the way that, say, their parent behaved in response to that behavior.
Yeah. There's this theory called transference acting out from, I forget whose theory it was, but like a personality disorder theorist, a researcher, saying that in personality disorders, that's where you're really maladaptively acting on those, whereas without some of those personality disorders, you can shine a light of awareness on it and heal it, and it can be quite productive in helping you thrive in day-to-day life. Getting at what you just said, they can be quite useful in therapy.
Yeah, and I like to think of the term cognitive heuristic. So we have these shortcuts that we develop over the span of our life based on our experiences and probably genetics, a lot of other things. And you can think of the projection of these relationships onto a therapist in this context, like transference, as you're using the cognitive heuristics, the shortcuts, the stereotypes that you've developed. And sometimes they're very adaptive and oftentimes they're not. So a good therapist in this case is helping you develop awareness about this energy transfer, right? Awareness about these shortcuts that you have, especially if they are unhelpful. And then after awareness comes change.
Yeah. Simple mathematics.
There you go.
Oh, it was Masterson, by the way, the personality researcher.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what about countertransference? What is countertransference?
Yeah. Your unconscious projections of your stuff onto the client.
Exactly. So originally, as it was defined by Freud, it was thought to be unhelpful, right? Countertransference is something that an unaware or not thoroughly enough analyzed therapist would do that can get in the way, because it's, in fact, he talked about it being the reaction to the client's transference. So the countertransference is the therapist's reaction to the client's transference, and that it would get in the way of the healing process that's started by the transference in the client.
Yeah. So there are two schools of thought, I guess. One, that transference and countertransference are happening 100% of the time, and you just need some awareness, and some of it is worse than others. And other ways of defining it might look at it as, these are unresolved conflicts of your own that you're spilling onto someone. But I like the former, just realizing that we have biases, we have triggers, we have projections. The work is never done, even if you're doing a lot of your own work. And just keeping an open state of awareness to it, and especially awareness to what might interfere in the therapeutic process. Some examples might help if some come to mind.
Yeah. So I'll give some examples in the context of what I found in studying for this lesson are at least one person's idea of 4 different types of countertransference. So one being subjective. These are the therapist's own subjective issues that are then being transferred onto the client. So let's say my mother was a complainer, and that really bothered me because I felt burdened to listen to her all the time and resolve the feelings that led to the complaints. And I have a client who starts to complain, and it sort of reminds me, maybe even not consciously, but reminds me of my mother. So I have a similar emotional reaction to the client that I do to my own mother, right? This is my stuff, my subjective stuff that I'm letting leak into the therapy relationship. So that might be an example of unhelpful countertransference of the subjective type. Objective is the therapist's reaction to the client's own maladaptive relationship patterns. So this example might be, let's say the client is behaving in a way that most people would find kind of annoying. So you notice yourself feeling annoyance, and it's not a reaction to any kind of, subjective issue that you have with another person in your life. It's how most people would react to this client's behavior. That countertransference can become good feedback for the client, or just something good for you to note as the therapist. I'm feeling annoyance. This feels like primary emotion. It's pretty authentic annoyance. I wonder if they show up like that in their life and that they're causing a lot of people to be annoyed with them, and which complicates their relationships. So that would be objective. The other two on here, positive and negative countertransference. So positive countertransference being not positive in that it is good, but it is the therapist being overprotective, or the therapist being over supportive, trying too hard to please the client. You have kind of your rescuer or healer archetype taken over. And so you're pouring on the positivity, maybe self-disclosing too much, trying to be the client's friend a little bit too much.
Yeah. And from the other side, you might have a client who, let's say, lost their father as a young kid, and they, even though they had a really loving relationship, they have this void and have always wished they could have, had more time with them, earned more of their approval, and that's shown up in other ways, like in the ways they've tried to take care of others. Could be positive things, but then in the therapy room with, say, an older male therapist who you subconsciously view as a father figure, you might really want to please or seek approval, or guess what I did? You'll be proud of me for this. And not that is, an interference in therapy, but it could be very useful content.
Right. It's a great example of useful transference content, right, that you could use. The last sort of the four types of countertransference being negative, and that is when the therapist acts out against the uncomfortable feelings that they feel triggered by the client in a negative way. So they might be overly critical or punishing toward the client, which would be inappropriate, unhelpful, and a reaction to your own countertransference.
Yeah. So say you're someone who had a really authoritarian teacher in school who was like bordering on verbally abusive to you, and if you didn't bring your homework in or something. They show up in Steve's therapy room, and Steve gives homework, and the client's like, I don't pay you to give me homework.
Right.
Like, hell no, am I doing that? And they're just projecting this old wound and unmet need that came up for them in elementary school onto you.
Yeah. And now I'm thinking of that from the countertransference perspective. And that might be, let's say, I've given them the homework and they're responding to me this way. And, I'm a people pleaser, and I'm uncomfortable with the client's resistance. And so
it's okay.
Right. So then I'm like, oh no, don't do your homework. It's okay. You don't have to do your homework.
I'm sorry.
So I might not be actually helping the client because I haven't resolved this tendency in myself to want to be loved by everybody.
Yeah, you can see how that could really interfere in therapy if both are acting in these, driven by these unconscious forces.
Yeah. I'll give an example from my own clinical practice. There was a time in my life where a family member was trying to decide how much to disclose here. A family member who was in a very stressful situation with a partner, and I felt like I wanted to rescue her. Right? This is my sister. I really wanted to help her. Wanted to rescue her. And then I had a female client in kind of a similar situation who's talking about her partner being unsupportive, and my white knight sort of
Yeah.
syndrome came online, and I felt this intense desire to just tell her, you need to leave him. You need to get a divorce. Like, just to give all this advice and rescue her. And fortunately enough for me, I had good supervisors who taught me to, pay attention to these kinds of things in
Yeah.
me. And I wasn't perfect about it. I certainly had to rein in those desires to give this person very, very pointed advice about what she should do and get out of this
Yeah.
situation, because that's what I wanted for my family member.
That's a really good example, an important one, a common one I've seen as well. And another way it shows up, or another reason it shows up so commonly, I think, is because all of us as babies, we're reliant on our caregivers for our needs. Like, we need help. We need them to fix the situation because we don't know how to feed ourselves or walk. As we grow up, we start to develop problem-solving skills, but you still need your parent, and the parent still needs to come in and fix it. But then fast forward a few decades, you're in the therapy room, and a signpost to look for as a therapist is, your client relying on you to fix something. Like, tell me what to do or fix it for me. And you might have this initial instinct or desire to jump in and fix it. Hey, I got this. I fix my kids' training wheels all the time or whatever. And then you jump in and fix it. But if you have this light of awareness on it and are aware of countertransference and transference and your own biases and the unseen forces at play, then you can say, take a step back. That wouldn't be helpful for me to go in and solve all their problems. Let's help them get to a place of self-sufficiency and helping their own self.
Right. Yeah, you can see as we talk about this that being I think being an effective helper, a therapist in this case, takes a lot of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And it takes a practice and discipline of keeping your self-awareness sharp. Falling into pits of countertransference is really common for early and sort of novice therapists.
Yeah.
And, maybe really experienced therapists who haven't gotten a lot of supervision or feedback, or they're sort of sequestered away in private practice and they never really interact with other people. You can get into these habits where you develop some calluses that hide these blind spots.
An example, I remember sitting down with a mushroom guide once, and we were talking about the work of psychedelic therapy, holding safe space, and all that. And as soon as I mentioned the word ketamine, they said, "Oh, ketamine is a medicine without a soul. Don't do it." And I was like, "Ooh, that's an interesting bias that shows up." And you could see how if a client said that about their ketamine course of treatment and got that reaction from their guide, it might be an interference.
Right.
Might cause some unnecessary shame.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we've touched on a few signs and symptoms, I guess. Like, as clinicians, how can we know when it's countertransference and not, one of these more productive ways of interacting with our clients? So we've talked about a few, but a couple others I just want to point out. If you notice that you're experiencing kind of an excessive or unreasonable dislike of your client, or the opposite end of that spectrum, if you just are kind of falling in love with your client, and that can be platonically or non-platonically, like we can have sexual transference and countertransference as well, then that's a good sign. You need to really take a breath, take a step back, and pay attention.
It's a great thing to bring to supervision. In fact, that is stated in the MAPS Code of Ethics for MDMA therapists that we adopt in our clinical work too. Is that you should readily seek supervision, because that is a way to check your countertransferences.
Yeah.
And the ones you're giving, I think it's important to point out that they go both ways. You can look for someone being overly critical and judgmental about you, and you feeling that about them, even if it's not spoken, of course, right. or you see their attraction to you, or you start to feel something in you towards them. Those are big signposts to be aware. Check in with your colleagues or supervisor.
Yeah. In my experience with colleagues, the kinds of behaviors of doctors, clinicians that get them in trouble with licensing boards are usually not they're usually not because of providers who are terrible, evil people. They usually start with unacknowledged countertransference
Mm-hmm.
that starts a slippery slope where, one of the ways we maintain good boundaries and stay out of multiple relationships with our clients is by being very aware of the feelings you're talking about as
Mm-hmm.
they show up, seeking supervision, as you suggested,
Yeah.
and then making sure that, you either address it or in some cases refer this client to somebody else if it's not going to work.
And that's fair. Yeah, that's a sign of strength, not weakness, is knowing your limits and asking for help.
Right.
So other signs to look for: inappropriately disclosing personal information, offering too much advice, asking for too much advice, boundary issues. Either way.
Yeah. Being preoccupied between sessions.
Oh yeah.
That happens to us every once in a while just because of the work that we do. We're humans helping humans who are suffering. But if you find yourself just completely drained and devastated and preoccupied by a particular client, it might be a sign of countertransference.
Mm-hmm. And just like that mushroom guide story, I think there's a risk out there in the broader psychedelic community and underground community of these things showing up, especially where there's a shaman or a guru type of figure who may have zero awareness of this concept.
Mm-hmm.
And then yet the participants might elevate them on a pedestal and really put extra weight on what they say. And what they say might be based on their own past unresolved conflicts and unmet needs. So
Yeah.
just something just to highlight how it really can interfere.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That kind of dynamic can happen with us, right? With who aren't shamans or guides in
Yeah.
that way, where clients come to value your opinion greatly. And in the context of this course, talking about the fundamentals of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, there's the potential with that medicine for people to form even stronger connections to their guides and helpers.
Yeah.
Facilitators. So be mindful of that because that can be transference on their account, which can be a great tool as we've been talking about to help people therapeutically, but it can also evoke countertransference in us and of a variety of kinds, right? It could be I like being the guru. I like having the attention and the adulation. And yeah, I am brilliant. I am a superhero spirit guide. Or the opposite, like, I don't like that pressure. I'm uncomfortable with how much you're revering me. So these are all things to pay attention to.
And it's okay to, once you have awareness of, to acknowledge that, oh yeah, what they said actually, a part of me or my ego enjoyed it. But as long as you have that awareness and don't bring it into a level of interfering in the therapy room, like it's okay to acknowledge the parts of you, and we're all doing the work continually. We all have unmet needs of the past, and we do tend to reflexively or unconsciously analyze the here and now through a lens of the past.
So as we wrap up the lesson, Reed, any ideas or concepts related to transference and countertransference specific to the work with ketamine that you think we ought to go over quickly?
Well, I think, why don't I just read what is in the MAPS Code of Ethics
perfect, yeah.
about sexual transference, because I think it's really relevant and a good example of how it's so clearly stated of what to watch out for, what to do.
Mm-hmm.
So MDMA-assisted psychotherapy carries unique ethical considerations, including likelihood of stronger and more complex transference and countertransference. We commit to examining our own sexual countertransference and not to act in ways that create ambiguity or confusion about sexual boundaries, and to seek supervision as needed.
Great. Well, thank you, Reed.
Thank you.